You might be able to hear me without the microphone, is that right? Let's put it away.
Preferably the microphone.
Sorry?
Microphone's better.
Okay. I'm not used to holding my, I need to move my hands around. Okay, I'll do my best. First of all, thank you to Tommy for inviting me to be here tonight. It's a great pleasure to be here. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about communicating across cultures. Now, I'm an academic. I do have a business background. My area of practice was human resource management until I became an academic. My areas of research interest are cross-cultural communications and cross-cultural management, but also people behaving badly at work. And I've put the two of them together. I've just got a book out about workplace bullying in different cultural contexts. So, and I'm a Mac user, and I'm not very good with PCs. So, can I have some assistance, please? I'm not sure how to get to my presentation. Thank you. Now, can I just double check, and I'll come back to this in a minute. I have how long? 20 minutes? Okay. Now, if I don't get through my slides, I'm quite happy for the participants to have them. I will probably spend more time on some than the others. I want to start by letting you read a story, because what I'm going to talk about tonight is about how important it is when we've got people from different cultures in the workplace. Now, as you can tell, I've got a funny accent. English is my second language. I was originally born in the Middle East, but I've spent most of my adult life in the Western world, in the UK, US, and Australia. So I want you to have a read of the story. I love that. I use that in my classes all the time. So that actually gets the message across that, for example, things like humour don't necessarily translate across cultures. In fact, in some cultures, it's not very good at all to use humour in business because it's seen as unprofessional. If you go to Germany, do not use jokes. Whereas in Australia, we actually use it right at the beginning, like I just did, to lighten the mood and get everybody sort of into it. So why is it important to know about communicating across cultures? There are problems in the workplace, and as I mentioned to you, one of my areas of research is people behaving badly at work, and a lot of it actually comes from misunderstandings. So urgent matters can interfere with communication because people can get very task-orientated, and sometimes they don't take note of the people element. And if you have different languages involved, that can complicate things even more. Communication can come in many different forms, and I'm going to talk, it's not only the verbal, but it's also the non-verbal. I'm going to touch on that very, very quickly. Communications are affected by cultural background and experience in terms of how we even address each other, how we give business cards, and if I had a bit more time, I'd go into it, but it's very, very important to be aware of the etiquette and the custom of whatever culture you're in, or if you are in Australia from another culture, to become very quickly familiar with the business etiquette in the workplace, because it's very important. And sometimes, in some cultures, non-verbal cues are often overlooked. Now, I come from the Middle East. In the Middle East, the context and what is said, how it's said, the facial expression, the tone of voice is very, very important. Whereas in much of the Western world, within the English-speaking world, the spoken word is very important. So it's what you hear and you interpret, but how you say it in some other what we call high context cultures is very important. And you can only learn that by being in the environment. Communications rely heavily on actions and cultural context. So I'm going to give you sort of a few more examples in a minute, but this is just an indication very, very quickly of what the most spoken languages in the world are. And there are sometimes similarities and differences, but also take into account and be mindful of the differences in each of those as well. But generally, as we know, business is the language of, English is the language of business. So communicating in foreign language has plenty of room for error, and I'm going to put a few up in a minute, more jokes for you. Lack of foreign language skills is a disadvantage in the international business context, because again, it's not always the what, but the how that becomes very, very important. So the common common errors, assuming that what was intended to be communicated is actually what's understood. Any of you travel to Japan? Can I have a show of hands? A few of you? Okay. In Japan, the word yes doesn't mean yes. Did you know that? It could mean all manner of things. Yes could mean yes. Yes could mean I've heard you, but I don't necessarily agree with you. Yes, depending on how it's said, could mean no. Or a number of other things in between. Now that becomes very confusing for us, doesn't it? Yeah, it does become very confusing. So it's about knowing the context and what's happening. Assuming that the ethnicity of expatriate managers equals sensitivity to their individual ethnic cultures. So it doesn't necessarily always gel, and I'll come back to that. Not recognizing differences in cultural interpretations of nuances in formal, informal, and personal communication. So again, there may be differences in how you address people depending on their age. In how many of your cultures do you speak a different version of the language when you're talking to elder people? In my mother tongue it is. It becomes very confusing, doesn't it? Whereas if you're talking to younger people, or people at the same level as you, you use a different version of the language, the more informal language. Have a read of these examples. Now this is actually from the marketing area, but it does become important in the world of work and business. They appear quite harmless at face value and they're funny to us, but they could also be very, very offensive if you think about it. So I just put those there so you can sort of see what actually gets out, believe it or not. So let me talk very quickly about non-verbal communication, because it's actually as important, and I'm keeping an eye on time. I'm going to come back to time in a minute. I'm going to keep it, so having a look at what is transpiring while people are talking. So it actually provides additional cues to the communication and language. So cultural variations. Expectations of interpersonal physical space. I always give this example. I had many, many years ago a party. I had a number of friends. I had two friends, and both of them were there with their partners. And they were talking to each other. They didn't know each other very well. And I was watching this interaction. The girl, who's very friendly, she's in the Middle East, she was very passionate, she was talking, she was waving her arms. And as she was talking, she was getting closer to the guy she was speaking with, who was Dutch. Now, he was very tall, quite sort of stony-faced, and as she was getting closer, I could see him move away, because she was getting in his personal space. Have any of you had that experience, when people get in your personal space or in your face? Now, he was really tall, and she was about my height. So he kept on moving back until he hit the wall. There was a wall behind him. I was watching him, it was amazing. And then after that, he actually started going like this, because he had nowhere else to go. And I wish I had a camera with me to take a photo. So it's really important to have that in mind in workplace interactions, because some people get really nervous. Others have no notion of personal space. And a lot of it, some of it is about the individual as well. I'm a very kinesthetic person, and from Middle Eastern cultures are very warm cultures. So I walk in and I hug my personal assistant every morning. And my operations manager, and that's just how we operate. Now, in a lot of workplaces that wouldn't be acceptable. But again, it's different people, different environment. Gesture that amplify or substitute for message, I'll come back to that. Facial expressions I've talked about. Touching, and again, sort of similar. In a lot of cultures, it's not appropriate to touch people, even if it's on the arm or the hand, or even in some cultures, for example, in the Thai culture, you never touch people on the head. Have you come across that in others? Because you're actually getting between them and the higher being to touch their head. Vocal qualities, tone, speed, how things are said, and any other contextual factors. So high and low context cultures, and you can sort of see where most of them are, what they have in common. So the high context cultures is not, they basically mean the spoken word is not what it necessarily means. And I'll give you another example. I was giving a lecture about this, and I had a girl put her hand up. It was a student who was Japanese. And she said, I can give you a really good example of this. I said, tell me. She said, I'm Japanese, my roommate is Australian, I'm very polite, I don't think she's very polite. And I said, tell me why. And she said, every Tuesday night we have to put the rubbish out. And every Tuesday night I put the rubbish out, but one night I was fed up. And I said to her, look, the rubbish is full. And I said, yeah, what does she say? And she said, oh, well, why don't you put it out? And she said to me, I was just shocked. And I said, well, what were you expecting? And she said, I was saying, look, the rubbish is full, but the intent was, and you should put it out. But what did the Australian girl hear? Just the first part. So she was shocked. She was devastated that she was getting a rude response back, but it's just because she was high context and she was expecting her roommate, who wasn't, to actually understand what she meant. Now imagine what sort of difficulties this can create in the world of work. This is just roommates and rubbish. How to become an effective intercultural communicator? Take into consideration that people are different. Provide as much information as possible. Look for any sort of potential communication problems. Email is very problematic because people read all sorts of stuff into it, and those of you, you're probably all too young to remember when email first started happening in the world of work. People used to use capitals, and I remember at the time, everybody was up in arms saying, why are you shouting at me? So they took the capitals as shouting, and the exclamation marks, and the different colours. So things have different meanings. A lot of students don't like their work in the olden days when we used to mark. Some people still mark just sort of on hard copy. They didn't like green or red. Even if they got, I remember this, even if they got a good grade, because I have marked it with a red pen, they would take offence. So you had to be blue or black, because the red was wrong, even if they got good grades. Delaying judgments and not making snap decisions, putting yourself in other people's shoes, and looking at sort of the interpretations. I'm going to start moving very quickly because I'm running out of time. Other non-verbal things you can think about is time, space, eye contact. In some cultures it's very rude to maintain eye contact, in others it's rude not to. How many of you have been in the Middle East? Eye contact is intense. People will not break their eye contact with you, they will stare at you. How many of you will feel uncomfortable? And I'm from the Middle East, and I had a student from one of the Arab countries and he was talking to me, and sort of after a while I thought, I was just actually trying to get out of his gaze, because it becomes quite uncomfortable. Smell, touch we've talked about, body language, colour is even very important, what you wear and how you wear it. And silence, in a lot of the Asian cultures, silence is actually part of the conversation. And those of us, and again, I sort of come from Middle Eastern culture, but I'm also very uncomfortable with silence. And what you would find a lot of Western people are. Why? Because silence is ambiguous. You don't know what silence means. It's just a pause. But in a lot of the Asian cultures, it's actually a sign of reflection and that you've taken things very seriously. So if you say something to people and they're just looking at you, it doesn't mean they didn't understand, or it doesn't mean that they don't care, but it could be that they're processing it. It could actually be a sign of respect, which is what not a lot of people might expect from silence. Attitudes towards time. Tommy was getting really worried because people were late. In the Middle East, time is very fluid, let's call it. So you say you arrive at what time, and people always are. My mum's always at least an hour and a half late where she goes. It drives me crazy. I've spent most of my adult life in the Western world. I'm very precise with time. In fact, I've got a dinner at 7 o'clock. So I said to Tommy, I need to be out of here by 6:30. This is why I'm going first, by the way, just so you know. Because I've organised my day just so that here. So time is very important. Now think about somebody who comes from a very fluid attitude towards time, from a culture like the Middle East, and is working in the Western world where people are very precise. If they're constantly late to work, how would that be perceived? If they don't hand in their work assignments on time, how would that be perceived? Not very well. So the context is very, very important. I do not accept assignments even if they're 2 minutes late. Because I think, you guys have had 6 weeks. You're right from first day of semester when the assignment was due, and they say, oh, but I was sick, I had a work assignment. I say, I don't care, you had 6 weeks. You need to manage your time. I'm a bit evil. But, gives you a bit of an idea. But I'm preparing them for the world of work. Because the expectation is you deliver on time. Otherwise, you are no good or competent. So look at it from the other perspective. So there's some countries where things happen one at a time. They're called monochronic. There's other countries where lots of things happen at once. I'll give you an example. How many of you hate queuing? Okay, so we come from monochronic cultures, where there's no sequential, we wait for everybody to go first. Everybody goes in at once. You walk into a shop, there's lots of people there, you just push through and go through. It's a cultural thing. Okay? So, but in some cultures it's seen as rude and pushing forward. But for us, with those sort of cultures, it's actually perfectly fine. Because lots of things that you push forward, you're having a conversation with someone, you're looking at your notebook about it. So lots of things happen at once for those of us from polychronic cultures. Here's a really quickly, you can have a read of it because I've got 3 minutes left. And after telling you I'm very precise with time, I'll finish on time. Okay, see where you sit and see how the others would perceive you from the other perspective, especially in the world of work. Eye gaze I've talked about. I'm going to flick through some of these very quickly. Touch I've talked about, that it's not appropriate in some cultures. Location of touch. Why avoid touching people with the left hand in the Middle East? That's a bit sensitive, but I'll bring it up because it's very important. Do you know? They always eat with their right hand. Why not touch with the left? The left hand is for washing yourself. Down there. So you don't touch other people with it. It's actually very rude. Or you don't touch food with it. Did you know that?